Welcome to episode 4, Sage Family Edition Study. Excited to cover our second episode of Marriage Savers.
Right.
In the last episode, we covered Dear Man exercise for conflict resolution, finding new language. And in this episode, we're going to be focusing on building love maps. And this is really important stuff because in the first 2 episodes, we talked about marriage killers and the 4 devastating, destructive patterns. And now we're talking about how to have better patterns and honestly fix some of them.
Right.
So what does it look like to build love maps?
So building love maps is learning each other's worlds, basically. And so intentionally starting, there's an exercise, and I thought it would be fun to kind of like show you guys some of the questions and ideas of building love maps. But it's kind of like knowing your spouse's hopes and dreams, knowing their disappointments during the day, really learning like silly things like what color does my spouse like to wear? What kind of clothes do they wear?
Yeah.
And just really kind of like studying your spouse. And so building love maps, there's a love exercise, and this is Gottman's work also. He's one of the most renowned researchers. Specifically, he has something called the love labs, where he studies couples and families and parenting even now. But there's some of these questions go like that. Name my 2 closest friends. What was I wearing when we first met? Name one of my hobbies. What stresses am I facing right now? Describe in detail what I did today or yesterday. What is my fondest unrealized dream? So he has about 20 in that specific one, but it's learning to intentionally get into this relationship, spending time with your spouse, not talking about the conflicts in your relationships, your differences, but trying to study and learn your spouse. So this actually goes hand in hand for me on the other one that we were going to talk about today, which is turning towards each other. In order to build a love map, you have to choose to turn towards or lean into your spouse, right? Which is the opposite of what stonewalling and contempt would do. Stonewalling would be, I've got to get away from you. I've got to push away to be better. This is saying, I need to lean into you, learn you, trust you, defer to you, be committed to you.
Interesting because in spiritually, me being a pastor and building this bridge of understanding our mind, how it works, our emotions, and really creating growth together and personally, these are language of repentance. Turning and forgiveness and of love, of this pursuit. And so these spiritual terms are of repentance, forgiveness, and pursuit and love. Serving one another, loving one another like Christ loved the church.
Yes, that's a huge one, right?
Pursuers,
in the Bible, it says, husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church. How can you be doing that when you're turning away from them? Jesus never turned away from us, the church, right? His bride. He turned to us.
He says he stands at the door and he knocks.
Right?
Just literally left hanging sometimes for a lifetime and knocking and knocking and knocking, that like relentless pursuit of one another. It's hard to do, but it's
I was going to say, as you were sharing kind of some of those questions or knowing things about your spouse, all I kept hearing was kind of like you have to be present and mindful within your marriage.
Right.
Because it sounds like it could be pretty easy to turn onto autopilot if you've been married for years. Like you're married, but are you taking the time to be like, how was your day, and actually listening, right? Instead of just asking it as like a checklist thing or something like that. And with life, busyness, children, jobs, everything we have going on, I feel like it could be very easy to get into autopilot. So this love map sounds a lot like being mindful, being intentional, and like having that desire to want to get to know your partner.
Right.
And if you don't have that, there's like perfect questions to kind of at least get the conversation started. It seems like.
And what's cool to me, because I've actually never done these questions in my own marriage, but I do feel that intentionally I'm always trying to turn in, you know what I mean? Because this is the biggest investment you make in your life, time, financially, everything, emotionally, is your marriage. And so if you're turning away, you're putting a bad investment into your marriage. And so I do feel like I've intentionally like always turned in, even in times of conflict. But I love that the way we've done love maps has been, taking frequent dates. And so sometimes the very first thing I do with clients is, how are you spending fun, quality time building that part of your relationship?
Yeah.
Because I believe a relationship is threefold in a marriage. You have the friendship part, you have the commitment part, but you also have the
mortgage.
sexual
mortgage
part, right? But it's like kind of, you want a balance of those three, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm always saying, how are you investing into these parts? What are things that you enjoy doing together, and how are you investing into them? So that's how we've done Love Maps. But I love this, especially for those that have never done that. But it starts with taking those times away, apart with each other to do that. And that's intentional.
And it is interesting. I have 4 kids, 5 years and under. And when Jess and I go on a date, we are literally standing in front of each other like, you know what sounds really nice right now? A nap.
Yes.
Right here in this booth. Do you think we could take a nap
at the restaurant
and just tip them well? And but it is important, even in those places of just sheer exhaustion.
Yeah.
And I've had people talk to me about like the rules for dates, like you shouldn't talk family and all these different kinds of things. And it's not always the best rules because they want you to focus on developing each other. I totally get it. But honestly, for me, it's just like even connecting on, man, that was a really hard day today, huh? Or it's been a really hard year.
Yeah.
And just talking about it and listening and hearing one another.
Well, and then those questions, it was asking hey, what are the biggest stresses for me right now? You know, what are the biggest disappointments in my life? And for me, my kids bring a lot of joy too.
Yeah.
You know, so talking about the funny things that they've done or how we responded. I don't really feel like there has to be rules other than if it's a highly conflictual marriage right now, some of those rules are very important because you don't want to talk about the things that are going to cause conflict. You want to start trying to build on what is good, not what is negative. Yeah. Because there's a lot of relationships are hard. Like Ashley and I joke about it sometimes. Like relationships are hard, not just marriage, but relationships. Yeah. And if you focus on the negatives of anything in life, that's what you're going to see. And so you want to choose to focus on really positive things too. Otherwise, there's no balance. And that's kind of what Gottman talks about too, is like the balance, right? You want a certain amount of positives to amount of negative interactions for a relationship to be good.
There's interesting dynamics I've noticed in, you know, the love languages, identifying those, and there's a lot of different things that talk about essentially getting to know accurately and well how somebody else works, because there are some default mechanics to your personality, and I have a natural curiosity to personalities and how they work. So I think it's not just information, but it's also like what makes them tick, what makes them move, what makes them flow, and what's a disruptor, a real stressor, and understanding those pieces of language and learning to laugh. I've learned to laugh at some of my own breakdown moments where I realized that I got frustrated, and then I started to say things that then got her triggered. And then sometimes I'll laugh in the middle of her being triggered by my frustration and go, you know what, I am 100% wrong, please forgive me. And I see what it did, and I see my, you know what I mean? So I'll notice sometimes right in the middle of the pattern, oops, this is on me. This is on me, and I completely, please forgive me.
I just think one of my favorite things is I love when somebody will say like, oh, this is all on me, but I don't ever feel like it's all on one person. I do feel like we all contribute to a cycle. That's just my belief system being a therapist. It's like, but what usually breaks down that conflict is someone owning their part. Like if I 100% go, I own my part, end of story, and don't keep picking on the other person's part, that's their responsibility to finally realize. And that's when they're going to have the biggest breakthroughs, when they realize their part. I'm only responsible to own my part. And so that breaks the cycle down really fast. So when somebody actually will step up and go, you know what? This is my part.
This is all Ashley's fault. That's what I say.
It's all my fault. For sure.
What's that look like for you when you want to approach really building a bridge to understand somebody and know somebody in relationship?
I think it goes back to a little bit of what we shared earlier, that vulnerability and kind of being open and real with your life. And I think that translates to marriage too, because we can put up walls, we can pretend we're okay. And even with some of this, I think if you have some of the things we've talked about, like criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, I think in relationships, like, so your close couple friends, people that you know, even talking about certain, maybe not everything, because we do keep things personal, but I think in communication and in sharing your struggles, that brings a strength as well for a marriage, because then you don't feel alone. someone might be like, oh, I struggle with that too. So then you feel like you can identify with them.
Yeah.
And in that, I think there's freedom for people to start to grow and heal. And so I know for me, that's something like talking to close friends about what we're struggling with. Or when you're in a relationship with someone, they can pick up on it, or they might call things out and you're like, oh, dang, you're right. You know, I do that.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say that's the most important part for me is I'm really choosy who I share because I want my marriage to work.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go with someone who's going to challenge me, not just go, oh, you're right, he's so bad.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that's usually not going to help me own my part of the marriage.
No.
And so because Ashley's a therapist too and has a lot of insight, oftentimes she's somebody I really am able to confide in, and her to me, I think.
For sure. Yes. As much as I allow myself to be vulnerable, yes.
But you have to know the safe people. And so Brene Brown talks a lot about vulnerability, right? Yeah. But she talks about you have to do it with safe people.
Yeah.
And you have to know the extent of vulnerability you are with people. So I like to be vulnerable with people, but I've learned like not everybody's going to do well and treat my vulnerability well.
Yeah.
And so I will be as vulnerable as I can be in that setting. And so you want to be careful who you've chosen. Yeah. Are they advocates for your relationship and for you?
That's powerful. Okay. So I want to encourage you to turn towards one another. Yeah. Choose to turn. Yeah. And choose to pursue healing language, repairing language, loving language, and the individual in the relationship, whether it be a husband or wife. And I believe this will profoundly help you at the very least access help and information in your journey. And I want to encourage you in this, to take courage in it, and to be willing to leave those things behind that would stop you. Yeah. And you're amazing. You got this.